Here, I'll do. All right, there we go. So as you know, I wanted to just pick your brain about the origins and the sort of ideas that went into Scenic. Quick, I
Okay,
didn't tell you this on the call. The other day you caught me right when I was walking out of the door. Um,
that's understandable.
so I was just fumbling. Um,
No
so
worries.
yeah, what happened was my daughter had an appointment at a pediatrician's office, and next door there's this cool resale store. And so
Yeah.
afterwards, we went in there, my wife and she went in there, and we were wandering around, and I found some records. I started digging through them, and I found this record, which was crazy because I thought I had searched the universe for all the desert instrumental records that I could find, and it was really weird because Bruce, I've literally been looking since like 1996 for something that evoked my native desert because I grew up in Arizona, and
Yeah.
that kind of had its own feel, but maybe it was as potent as this first Friends of D Martinez album. I'm not sure if you heard that one.
Yeah. I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
So I found this and was like, wow, okay, what's this? And it just was
Right.
like it was a very analog experience of record shopping. And I imagine it plays into the way you've thought about designing things so that they get people's attention.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you were in Tucson in the 90s, right?
Yes.
Because we played several times at Club Congress in the late 90s. And I
Yeah,
like Tucson. It was a and the who was the guy that was the sound man there, the main guy there?
was it
'Cause he was
Jim?
a musician as well.
Was it Jim Blackwood? I think he's just an archivist.
No, no, it was a musician, a guy who
Hmm.
recorded albums, and I'm spacing on his name, but
Wow, I'm curious. Um, so we're talking like early mid '90s.
so it would have been between like 96 and 98 in that era,
Okay,
probably.
that's exactly when
Because
I was down there.
yeah, because Incident at SEMA came out in 95, and then the second album, Aquatica, came out in 96, and we started getting more active after Aquatica came out.
Interesting.
And yeah,
Did you?
I was living in Sedona at the time from like 92 to 2007. My wife and I lived in Sedona, and I connected up with some musicians in Phoenix or Tempe area. So this fellow named Brandon Capps, who had a group called Half String, kind of a shoegaze band, and he started this whole sort of beautiful noise scene, is what he called it. And he put on some festivals, and so Scenic played at all those festivals, and I printed tickets for it, and his band Half String played, and so
Is this the one that Kimber Lanning is in? Is that
yes,
that you have?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
because
She
I
was a drummer in Half String.
this is such a small world. I've got this Calexico poster, this real old one over here. But
Yeah,
I saw Calexico play in '98 in her store. I grew up going to Tinkweeds as a kid. And then
yeah.
when she started hosting shows, we would go and they recorded that show on a 4-track Tascam, and I gave her a copy of it. And it's just one of the most beautiful two-piece shows I've ever seen, and the fidelity is amazing. So
Nice.
all the stuff that I missed. So it looks like from my deep dive in the last couple days, like you said, Scenic started in '92. You were leaving Savage Republic had ended in '89ish, and
Yeah.
you all were getting ready to leave. You and your wife were getting ready to move to Sedona, but you had this idea that you wanted to do this instrumental band that sort of a soundtrack for the Mojave. Can you tell me about the origins, the ideas?
Yeah, we didn't think about moving to Sedona till early 92. So I mean, I just had enough of the Savage Republic experience at that time, and just felt like I needed to do something that was more what I wanted to do. And it took me a couple of years to get to the point of actually doing something. And it was actually the moving to Sedona that was the catalyst for it, because I knew that I wanted to work with James Brenner and Brock Wirtz on this music. And so we ended up moving to Sedona, and then literally like a month later, I took my first trip back to LA and had an early rehearsal with those guys. And so the band started right after we moved.
I see. Okay. And
And
oh, go
so
ahead.
the original band was just, I had a whole bunch of music that I was starting to work on, which some of which is on the demo, the bonus demo CD that we just
Mhm.
released with Incident at SEMA. And yeah, James, the bass player, had a recording studio that he had set up in his house. And he heard me playing some of these songs. He's like, Bruce, just bring your guitar over. Let's get these song ideas down. We can work on them, you know? And so I just went over there and I just played everything that I had been working on, and he recorded it. And some of that is on the bonus disc, and some of it is not very good at all. And so it will never see the light of day. And, but we decided to just choose some of the songs to work on. And then we brought Brock in to be the drummer, and the three of us recorded all the basic tracks. And then we went into another studio to do overdubs. And that's when we started bringing in other people to flesh the songs out. And so Robert Lovelace, who I had worked with in Savage Republic before, came in and did some keyboards and other instrumentation. We asked Jeffrey Clark to come in, who is now my partner in Independent Project Records. He was the singer in Shiva Burlesque. And I first met James because of his bass playing in Shiva Burlesque. And that was why I decided I wanted to work with him, because of the band that I'd seen him play in before. But Jeff just did a few harmonica pieces on a few songs, like Kelso Run, that's him doing the harmonica. And we asked a couple of other people to come in and add spice here and there. But my idea for Incident at SEMA was that I wanted to make an imaginary soundtrack, like imaginary film soundtrack. But as time went on, and we began working on it, I thought, well, that kind of idea has been done before, and it wasn't that interesting. And in the meantime, I've been going out to the East Mojave Desert and taking these photographs with this little plastic point-and-shoot camera, fixed panorama.
That one?
Yes. So all those photographs were on this little $12 camera that I got at Thrifty Drugstore. And you put your own film in it. So I was putting black and white film in. And actually, I did, like, there's a silver sepia toned exhibition print that I had made of this. The image that's on the first album. So I was doing all these photographs just because I loved what I was getting from this camera. I mean, it's a cheap plastic lens. It's a little fuzzy around the edges, but it somehow just gave a feeling that, like, this picture could have been taken 100 years ago, or it could have been taken yesterday. And I liked that. And so I was taking all these pictures in the East Mojave, and I started thinking, well, what if this was a soundtrack for the East Mojave? What if we kind of switched it from being an imaginary film soundtrack and make it a soundtrack for a place? So that was the idea. And I think it worked. But, the whole idea with film soundtracks, it's like there might be a theme that gets repeated and reinterpreted in different ways. And I wanted to bring that into the whole Incident at SEMA thing. And so that's why there's things like On the Dune and Bossa Dune, where it's the same guitar phrase, just played differently, set up different instrumentations. And I think that really helped the album to have more cohesion, because you would hear something new, but it would be familiar as you go through and listen to the album. So for me, Incident at SEMA is, I think, one of the most successful records I've ever played on. So, and to me, it's still, I mean, I think there are issues that I have nowadays with some of the sounds on it, but on the other hand, I love it. It's kind of like it fulfilled what I wanted to do with creating something as a musical expression. So.
Interesting. I mean, to think of your body of work and for that to be one of the albums that stands out as the most successful project is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, the other interesting thing about it is that of all the albums that I've been involved with the different bands, that's the one that is most closely to how I conceived it. So it's kind of like everything else in Savage Republic ended up becoming much more of a collaborative process. And I didn't really want that. But what happened the same thing happened with Scenic. As we went along and we brought new people in and we developed new material, it became much more of a collaborative process. And I'm not saying anything bad about the collaborative process, because there's some amazing stuff that I would never have been able to do myself. And I value the people I work with. But on the other hand, in terms of, an artistic vision, say that Incident at SEMA is the closest to anything that I've done so far that fulfills that.
Yeah, and because it was the first one out of the gate with that project, it was the one that stuck closest to your original vision of it. And it hadn't been.
Exactly.
Now that's interesting too, because from what I'd gathered from being a Savage Republic fan for a while was that one of the issues that there was a division in the band after Tragic Figures about which direction to take the band to go, the band should go, and so some of that material became another band's album. And there was also sort of this debate in the band about being an instrumental band or being more of a vocal band. So was this idea of it being not such a collaborative project, Scenic not being such a collaborative project, like the direct result of your experience with that collaborative issue in Savage Republic?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's
Okay.
fair enough.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's not that I didn't want to collaborate with, and it's not like I told James what to play or Brock what to write. I mean, they all created their own parts, and it's the same with the later material. But I think at that point, it just started being with the three of us. And then we brought people in to help us flesh out the album. And then we thought, well, we want to do some shows. We need more people in the band now. And so we brought in, actually we needed another guitarist, because on the recordings, I was playing both the rhythm guitar and the lead guitar. And we needed a rhythm guitarist. So we actually brought in Brandon from Half Strength to play rhythm guitar with us live. And he ended up recording a few things on the Aquatica album, our second album. And then he needed to refocus on Half Strength. So we brought in another friend of James's, Doug Smith, and he contributed some really brilliant stuff to the Aquatica album.
I need to get that one next.
And then he eventually left, and we brought in another friend of James's, Mark Master Pietro. And so he's the one that we worked with on the third album.
It's a different kind of experience when you're performing something live.
Yes, it is.
So let me go back to the beginning then. So you had this idea for an imaginary soundtrack. What brought you out to the desert to be photographing with this cheap camera in the first place that would have altered your concept and made it not about an imaginary soundtrack, but about Mojave specifically? Why were you out there taking pictures?
Well, when I was growing up, my parents always took my brother and I out to the desert. They owned a glider, sailplane. And so they would go out to the desert to fly the sailplane like once a month. So I was very familiar with the desert from that experience, just going out there. And then when I was in college, I used to go out to the desert, and I wanted to make a film out in the desert. And that was sort of how the whole Desolation Center thing started happening, when Stuart Sweezy contacted me about doing a show in the desert. Like I said, I had a location in mind, because I'd been sort of scouting it for a film that I wanted to do with Savage Republic, which never happened. So yeah, I've just always been drawn to the desert. It's very beautiful and stark, and the East Mojave is a really pretty amazing place. The dunes out there. Actually, I think it was 1990, after Savage Republic had ended. My wife is an artist, and so she had been wanting to do some collaborative art projects, like land-related installation type pieces in the desert. And so she conceived of getting a group of artists together to go out and spend a weekend creating some land art that we would document, and then create a print of, and then sell them and donate the proceeds to environmental causes.
Wow.
So We ended up doing two of those projects, and the first one was at the Kelso Dunes, which is in the East Mojave Desert. And so that was my introduction to that particular area, was just going out there and doing that collaborative experience. So it kept bringing me back. I just thought, well, I want to, and when I started getting these cheap cameras, I was like, well, that's where I want to go photograph. It's pretty amazing out there.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, having grown up in the desert myself, and I know some of my friends who are Angelinos experiences, either you drive through the desert and, you know, north of the Salton Sea and through the Palm Springs area, and you either ignore it, hoping to get where you're going, or you look out the window and just think, I got to come back here and explore this. You know,
I
it's
gotta
like,
get off the main road.
yes, yeah, and just like end up on a dirt road or just pick somewhere random. And so it's also interesting that you ended up in the East Mojave, up in that side of stream side of San Bernardino County, because it really is off the beaten path. You have to want to go there. So I was so curious why you ended up there, like where the depot's at. I mean, it's not really on the way to many places.
No, you have to purposely want to go out into a place where, you're 40 miles away from the nearest gas station kind of thing, or 80 miles away, or whatever it is. So yeah, and
Yeah.
at that time I just was really enjoying exploring the back roads, things like that.
So you would just pick places on a map
Yeah,
or see
yeah,
road.
pretty much. Yeah, we get a map and say, oh, that looks interesting. I'll go check that out. Or that's got an interesting name. Wonder what that looks like. No. So it's like, and hole in the wall. And I mean, that's the thing, is that um, we recorded all this music and we didn't necessarily have titles for it while we were recording it. It was like afterwards we would listen to it and see, and then I would pick names off of the map of the East Mojave. It's like hole in the wall or down Black Canyon Road. It's like, oh, okay. I remember driving down that black dirt road. That's Black Canyon Road. And it's kind of like you've got this huge expanse in front of you and you're miles from anywhere. And yeah, maybe there's a campground up there, but there's very few people. And just that sort of lonely feeling with the harmonica and everything it was just like, oh yeah, that's that. Hole in the Wall is an amazing place with these rocks that have these holes in them. And it's just, again, that was Robert Lovelace that kind of did the keyboard synthesizer stuff on that track. And it's just like, whoa. And here was the interesting thing. When we finished recording the album, James and Brock and I took an overnight camping trip out to the East Mojave. And I remember we camped at Hole in the Wall. And after we had dinner, he had a boombox, and we played a cassette of the entire album and just like laid out there looking at the stars, listening to the album. Like, yeah, we did it. And I've heard from a number of people who have bought the CD and they've gone out to the East Mojave and they play it while they drive around out there to say this is the perfect thing.
How does that feel? I mean,
It feels great. I mean, it's like, yeah, we did it, and here we have something for. And there were a number of years where it was out of print, and I wanted to get a new edition of the CD happening, and I kept thinking, once they reopened that Kelso Depot as sort of the visitor center, I thought, oh well, I should get them to have some CDs there.
Exactly.
I guess they're closed again, but hopefully they'll reopen again sometime. I don't know. I just need it's something to do. Make it.
Well, it's good. You got to get into people's hands. I know how challenging it is. It's hard enough to make something, let alone get it into people's hands.
It was interesting before I ended up deciding to release it myself, when I had the recordings done, I was talking to a couple of other people I knew at indie labels. And there was this one guy back east who he really wanted to license the record and release it, but he wanted to make cassettes of it to sell at truck stops. That was his idea. I thought, well, that's interesting. But anyway, ultimately we ended up not going that direction. Of course, now truck stops sell CDs, but
yeah, every time I've taken lots of road trips, and I always love looking at the truck stops tapes and CDs just to see what was playing. Like the truck stop, there was somebody called the Truck Stop Comedian, and it was just, I mean, it just looked like it would be
Right.
slightly offensive, but
Yeah.
maybe not the place you want to be selling Incident at SEMA.
Yeah. But I think the visitor center, if they open that up again, that would be worth connecting with.
Yeah, I'm actually sad to know that they, after the building was avoided demolition and became the visitor center, that it's closed at all.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think the feeling, like when people see a desert, a lot of people see it's kind of a weird litmus test of, or Rorschach test of people's way of interacting with the world. I think, people look at a desert and some people see emptiness or a lack of
Yeah.
activities or destinations, whereas some of us see a mystery or we get curious about what's on the other side of a bend. And then there's what you described earlier as just the feeling. Just there's not a thing to see necessarily, but there is a feeling to have out there.
Experience. Yeah.
And it's really kind of a singular. I know the mystics have a long history of going out there and having experiences, coming back with truth and ideas, but just for the casual visitor, it can
Yeah.
really be life changing. And so that's one of the reasons that I really am moved by this work, is because it captures the feeling, the image, and the sense of being somewhere that is pretty distinctive.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad,
Yeah.
glad you got that from it. And after we did the third album, I had been wanting to do another album that was a soundtrack to a place. And I can't remember exactly when it was, but I did make a few trips through an area in southern Utah called the Kapirowitz Plateau, which is just north of Lake Howell. And it attracted me in a very, similar way. And so we ended up recording some demos actually before the third album. We recorded a few demos of songs that I'd been developing for that area, but ultimately we never got back to them. We ended up going in a different direction for the third album. And then after that was done and we'd done some touring, there were some interpersonal issues within the band. And I just thought, you know what, I need to set this aside for now. Kept thinking would get back to it, but I haven't. So.
And what year were those demos from the Utah?
So those demos were probably 98 or thereabouts. And we ended up doing, in the early 2000s, we did a little West Coast tour with this British band called Breathless, who we had gotten in touch with.
Huh.
They released our third album, The Out to Gospel Experience, on their label in the UK on CD. And they came over and we did a little West Coast tour with them. And so I've made up like 50 CDRs of that. So of 4 of those demos, which we sold on tour. And actually one of those songs is on our Source compilation CD called Above the Rim. So, and I'll send you one of those CDs too. But
I would love that.
You can go on the Independent Project Records YouTube channel, and there's a video. Actually, it's kind of an intro, like a 1-minute intro video that shows it has a clip from the song, and it shows some of my photos from the Kapirowitz Plateau. So take a look for that.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, and you've already answered it, but I was curious why, if you had this vision for place-based music, why did you start with the Mojave, and what other places were you thinking about, finding inspiration or trying to write music about?
So that was the next place that I wanted to kind of focus that on. The Aquatica album just sort of evolved out of our coming up with new music with some of the other new members that we brought in. And so that sort of went into a different direction. And I always felt like it had sort of a aquatic progressive rock Mediterranean feel to it.
Huh.
And I actually ended up sending one of these little cameras to somebody I knew in Greece and said, take it to the beach and take some photographs. And so we used one of those photos on the front cover.
That's what's on the cover.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, and then the third album, the photos from that are ones that because I've been flying back and forth between Phoenix and LA to work with Scenic, I would take photos out the window of the plane. And so those are photos.
How did you choose the 2 other guys to play the first album with? You said they both lived in LA too?
Yeah. And I was familiar with their playing in other bands. James Brenner, the bass player, was in the band Shiva Burlesque, and as I mentioned, and I was really impressed with his ability and his melodicness of bass, the bass playing. And then Brock, I knew from another band, and I wanted somebody. I didn't want a professional drummer, but I wanted somebody who could have feel. I mean, our original drummer in Savage Republic, Mark Erskine, was completely self-taught, and he did some completely wacko things, but he did some brilliant stuff too. And I think I value creativity over ability in some sense. You know, I mean, ability is important, but there's highly technical stuff I don't need necessarily.
Yeah, it seems like coming from the punk rock school and also art school,
Yeah.
I imagine you appreciate the freedom of thinking beyond convention, that
Well,
self-taught
yeah, and I
musician
mean,
has.
it's interesting for me because I mean, here I've been making music for almost 45 years now since I bought my first guitar, and I couldn't tell you what notes and chords I'm playing. I mean, I don't read music. I don't. Um, I mean, I know what the strings are, and I know what some notes are, but I've never really felt like. I mean, it was interesting because I've played some music with a few people, and they've said, "Well, Bruce, you could probably do more if you learned music theory and all of that." And I almost don't want to because I like the creation of sounds that are pleasing to me. And fortunately, I found, some people that I can play with. I mean, that's the thing. It's like when we moved here to Bishop a number of years ago, there were other musicians here in town. And I'm like, oh, you do music. Yeah, let's jam. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if that would really work because, they're coming at it from a blues-based background or folk music or whatever. And I don't necessarily play music that way. So. And now the music that I'm working on with my wife Karen in SR2, not only do we have unusually strong and unusually tuned electric 12-string guitars, but we've tuned them down to 432 instead of 440. Something that we kind of started hearing about a number of years ago and thought, well, let's see what happens when we do this solfeggio tuning, is what they called it. And it was interesting because it was excuse me. The songs we've been playing previously when tuned to 440, sometimes they would seem kind of harsh, and we just tuned down to 432 and it somehow softened it. And I almost thought, well, is this taking away an important edge to the music that needs to be there? But the more we did it, the more we realized that we felt better playing at 432 than 440. And at the same time, we didn't get ear fatigue as much. Like I listened to some demos that I've recorded of solo material before we started experimenting with 432. And I love the music. I really love what I was creating, and I need to finish that material at some point. But I can't listen to the whole album all the way through, but it just gets kind of too harsh.
Huh.
And I'm thinking that if I re-record all those songs at 432, then it's not going to be that way.
Interesting. Because you also replaced a lot of strings with the same strings back in the day, right?
Yeah. Well, and that was way back in the early days of what the band that became Savage Republic is that I had been, I mean, the music that inspired me to finally go out and buy a guitar was the No New York album that Brian Eno produced with the No Wave bands
in
New York in the late 70s. I bought that album and it just kind of blew my mind. The sounds that, especially on the B-side, the two bands that were on the B-side, Mars and DNA. I was just like, oh my God. And it was DNA, listening to DNA, that it finally clicked in my mind. I can do this. It's like they were just these really simple, repetitive things that were layered. And it just was like, I can do that. And that was, so I went and bought a guitar.
Interesting. Those were the bands on that album too, because DNA, the repetitiveness of it always struck me. As a listener, it didn't empower me as a musician. But the layering too. I mean, it seems I don't know, is it analogous to visual art in a way? I know letterpress isn't entirely an act of layering, but um,
Letterpress is, yeah, because you can only print one color at a time. And so I've worked with layering a lot in my design work when I worked on letterpress. It's like you have to conceive of what, and then how the ink it lays on. It's like, especially printing on like the chipboard, which is an uncoated surface. And so when you lay some ink down, like an opaque white base, that becomes a coating. You lay something else on top of that, and you overlap onto the uninked surface. Your next color is going to look different when it's on the chipboard than when it's on white. So there's this whole other dimensionality that you can play with. And I love the chipboard because it's a medium tonality. So you can go light and dark on it. And then when I start playing with the metallic inks, that even adds another layer of dimensionality.
so it is more analogous to the DNA layering of sound
Yeah.
than I. Wow.
Well, and the other thing that was hugely influential to me musically was seeing Glenn Branca play early on. And I had Glenn Branca, the New York guitarist that was doing our army stuff,
Yes.
music. I hadn't heard any of his music, but I knew he was somehow connected with the No New York scene. And it would have been early '81. I just saw a flyer at the UCLA art building where I was still at school, and that he was going to do a performance at Cal Arts in Valencia. So I drove up there on that day. I had no idea what I was going to see. And it was a 6-member band, 4 guitars, bass player and drummer. And I think Lee Ronaldo from Sonic Youth was probably one of his guitarists at that time. I don't know.
Wow.
I know that Lee and Thurston played with Glenn early on.
I don't know that.
But anyway, I mean, they spent like 10 minutes tuning their guitars, and it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever heard. I was just like, wow, this is going to be good. And they played in this art gallery that had like an upstairs balcony, and I don't know, there may be 30 or 40 people there milling around, and then they just started playing, and it was just like, wow, this is amazing stuff. And they did 4 pieces, each maybe 10 minutes long or so. And by the 4th piece, Glenn would just stand out front, and everybody was just like strumming, and he would conduct them. And so everybody was like creating these drones, and then all of a sudden he would do this, and some would shift up and some would shift down. It was the layers, this whole layering of sound and how it shifted around in the stage. And by the end of the last song, I was hearing sounds that I couldn't see anybody playing. I mean, just all the overtones and how they were bouncing around, and so after they played and they were putting their guitars away, I went up to one of them, maybe it was mine, I don't remember, and just to say, hey, this was really amazing. And it was at that point that I realized that they didn't have the normal strings on their guitars. The guitar that was being put away had all the same strings on it, but unison tuning. And I was like, I'm doing it. And I went home and took all the strings off my guitar and put all B strings on and started messing around with it. And the next Savage Republic rehearsal we had, I said, hey guys, I got this new guitar way of stringing it. And I just had been listening to the Faust 4 album and the opening track on that called Krautrock. It was just this like droning piece that was really back and forth, really inspirational. So I played that for the guys. I said, we should do something like that. And then our song Exodus off of the first album is what we came up with.
That resulted from that.
Yeah. So that's Glenn Branca and Faust is what, and Lawrence of Arabia, film soundtracks. All came together. It was basically bass, my new guitar, and then 2 of the guys just played percussion, little like metal pipes clicking back, metal pipes playing on a metal rail, a piece of like railroad rail. And then the other was claves.
That so many comments and thoughts about that. Like, for one, it's like you're obviously unconstrained by conventional ideas of what a song could be from the get-go.
Yeah.
which seems to have opened up your entire life to experimentation and
Yeah.
seems to have defined Savage Republic from the get-go as well.
Yeah.
But also, it's an argument for the analog coming from the living in the digital world and coming from the analog era of getting out, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe you would have read about the way he strung the guitar, but you learned about that from standing in front of him and looking at his guitar.
Yeah.
Changed your whole life, getting out there.
It did. Yeah.
That's not a question. It's just that it just blew my mind.
Well, so yeah, and it's interesting because I mean, to me, I like those happy experiments and just how things fall together. Yeah, when I bought my first guitar, didn't have a clue what to do with it, and so I signed up for lessons. I took guitar lessons for 6 weeks. Okay, here's how you make this chord. Here's do this pattern. And after 6 weeks, I got tired of learning Chuck Berry riffs, and I was just like, okay, I know what to do now. So I quit and I just started experimenting. What kind of weird sounds can I get out of this thing? You know?
Is that what led you to the tunnel? Because didn't you end up in the tunnel in UCLA?
Yeah. It managed to kind of run across these subterranean utility tunnels. And that was where the first rehearsal was for the band that became Savage Republic. I managed to get, I did a film. I got permission to shoot a film in the tunnels for an student project. And at that time, I mean, they literally just gave me a key for 6 months and said, bring it back when you're done. So I had free reign, and I can't imagine that happening now. But while I still had the key, Mark Erskine, who I had known, he and I had done some metal percussion experiments at UCLA. He was like, "Oh, I got this drum kit. My dad bought me this funky wooden drum kit." So he and I decided we were going to go down the tunnels and jam. And then my friend Phil Drucker said, "Oh, I got this friend who is a really great bass player. He wants to learn how to play experimental bass. Can I bring him along?" I was like, "Sure, come down." And so the four of us just got together and jammed. It was, and we had a boombox, and I still have the tape from that recording, and I think at some point we will put some of that material out. It's super. Actually, I take that back. Maybe some of it. No, there's more of it that still needs to come out. But yeah, we had 2 basses, little cheap amps, a fuzz box, and metal percussion in the drum kit. And it's marks the hi-hat symbol.
Oh yeah.
Which I've never really liked the sound of hi-hats. His was all completely mashed up, so it made this like sound when he played it. It's great. It was perfect.
And you had the foresight to report it just because you weren't sure what was going to happen?
Yeah. We just thought, let's record this so we can remember what we did. And then we came out of the tunnels after a couple hours and sat down, and there was like this North Campus area where they had a snack bar and vending machines, and we just sort of sat out there and got some snacks and listened to it. And like, yeah, we should keep doing this. I remember looking up on the wall above one of the vending machines, and there was this torn up flyer. There were a lot of Iranian students at UCLA at the time, and so that was right around the time of the Iranian Revolution, and so there was all of this Iranian propaganda on revolutionary looking posters on the walls there. And I remember seeing this one with Farsi script on it, and these guys being executed, and said, "That's our record album."
And that was right after the rehearsal.
Yeah.
My God. It's sort of, that really is interesting because the way your life enmeshes graphic design or visual art and music together, it just makes me think like it started that moment in some way.
Well, the whole thing of the art school at UCLA in the late 70s was extremely creative. It's really, and it was right when, I mean, again, the other huge inspiration for me was with conceptual artist Chris Verdon, who came and taught there. in
Oh,
78 or 79, I can't remember which. But I signed up for his first class, and that just blew my mind. That just opened me up completely. Okay, what's possible to do with art? And my first independent project record was as an independent project course with Chris Burden as my counselor advisor. So,
and that's why you ended up coming up with the name for the record label,
yeah,
right? Because you thought, well, what is this thing? And it's
yeah. I didn't think I was starting a record label. I just wanted to make a record as Piece of Art. But as I was going along with it, I was like, well, I have to make a cover. I guess I better make a record label name. What is this? And every name that I came up with just seemed kind of, I don't know, it seemed kind of stupid. And I thought, well, what is this? It's an independent project record. Okay, that's the name.
and it stayed. Wow. It's
Yes. Yeah, and as soon as I finished it, I was like, that was fun. I'm going to make another one. So,
that's what happened. I mean, you right?
Yeah. Yeah, the second one was my good friend Dan Bosnick, who was the singer in that band After Image that I sent you links to. He and I went into the tunnels with a guitar and a bass and his boombox. And we just jammed on a bunch of stuff in the tunnels. And that became the Bridge EP, that was the second release.
I saw that on Discogs and I was confused if that was some sort of one-off or was supposed to be a soundtrack for a film or something. So that's what it was.
No, it's just we went down into the tunnels one afternoon and recorded a bunch of stuff that we did, and then I edited pieces of it together to make another record.
And at that point, you were still doing. I read about your letterpress work, of course, and a little bit of the history of its evolution. But you weren't letterpressing then; you were still like Xeroxing, silk screening, right?
Well, I did some silk screening. I had access to silk screen equipment at UCLA, and so the first album, or I'm sorry, the first 7-inch, I was able to use that equipment to green print the label. I had the records pressed with no paper labels on them, so it was just the black plastic. And I thought, okay, you've got the white sleeve with the hole in the middle. If you silk screen across that center piece with an image, a photographic image, it goes from positive to negative to positive. And because you're on a white background on the sleeve and a black background, same thing. But that's cool. I'll do that. Yeah, I was doing a lot of experiments.
Yeah, because and then you took the letterpress class and learned how to do that downtown, right?
When we were working on recording the first Savage Republic album, I knew I wanted to make an artistic album jacket for that. And I was working as a courier for UCLA Extension at the time, which is the extension is the after, the adult classes and the after school classes you sign up for. And so we got to sign up for a free class every quarter because we worked for extension. So there was a class being offered on offset lithography. And I thought, well, maybe I can print my covers using this. And I went to the first class and there weren't enough people signed up for it, so they canceled the class. But the teacher said, well, we're going to be teaching this letterpress class here at the Women's Graphic Center starting next week if you want to sign up for that. So I was like, I had no idea what letterpress was, but I thought, oh, sure, why not? So, yeah, and so I took that class and we learned to print on a Chandler price, like what Lorenzo's printing on back there, the hand feeding pieces of paper, and we made a postcard. So I made a postcard advertising that the first album from Africa Flow, which is what we were named at the time, was coming soon. And while I was there, I noticed they had this big flatbed press with an 18 by 24 inch bed. And I realized that was the perfect size for printing an album jacket. So I said, well, if I take a class again, will you teach me how to use that press? And she said, sure. And so I took the class again and printed 1,000 album jackets.
The classic double dipping that a resourceful artist with low budget has to do.
Oh yeah,
So
exactly.
you learn how to do it, and then you walked out of there with a bunch of record sleeves.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Wow. Scrappy as hell. I mean, that's wild. Because like there's a lot of nice looking. I pulled out this one record. There's a lot of nice looking records that are silk screen and have gold. This is a favorite like '90s surf album I love.
Yeah.
Some shiny stuff. But and that would have grabbed my attention too if it was in a bin. But this kind of design is just to me next level.
So that die cut design there,
Yeah.
of the jacket, that was actually conceived of by our drummer Brock Wirtz, because in the late '80s or early '90s, he decided he was a huge punk rock fan and he wanted to start his own label, and so he started this label called Intermission Records. He only put out 3 7-inches, but he designed that jacket concept. And I said, hey, I would love to use this for our first Scenic house, 7-inch. He's like, yeah, great. So actually, if you look at that, it's a co-release between Independent Project and Intermission.
Yeah, it's somewhere that's on the
And
bottom.
so I pretty much did the whole thing, but because it was his concept of how the thing got die cut and folded together, I figured, and he's also in the band, he's playing drums, so why not have it be a co-release?
Interesting. Yeah,
So
I was wondering about that because I'd seen this format with the folding tab, with the tab and the envelope format in of other releases of yours, but that
yeah,
was that was Brock's idea.
yeah, the initial one was Brock's idea. Yeah, and now, a lot of our um album jackets, the 12-inch LPs, are that style. So
It's a great
I'll get
idea.
free copies.
What about the inserts? What made you decide? You just had a lot of photos. You thought it'd be kind of
Yeah,
neat.
I mean, I thought it was a nice way to get a lot more of my photography into the project, and I've always liked the idea of having, you don't just get the record, you get other cool stuff inside too. So I like, and those inserts were made on a Minolta 2-color photocopy machine that I had at the time. That was the most expensive piece of equipment I ever bought for my shops. I think it was like $6,000 in the late '80s, but I leased it over time and eventually paid it off. But it was amazing because both of those colors, the sepia and the black, it was one pass through the copy.
Wow.
And um, and I took that with me to Sedona, and it was the early 2000s, and it was a point where I couldn't get toner for it anymore. I couldn't get anybody to come service it, and it was breaking down. I literally left it at the dump.
Because they'd been outdated and so they weren't
Yeah,
servicing
yeah.
it the same way.
Everybody was going digital, and
Wow.
nobody would work on it. Nobody would keep it running for me.
How sad.
It is sad. I mean, it's an amazing. I keep thinking new technology should not displace the old. We should just have all technology still available to us. But in general, the older technologies quite often seem to, unless there's enough of an interest to keep them going, like letterpress.
Yeah.
Letterpress, when I first learned it, was dying out. And I knew another letterpress printer, a professional letterpress printer, and he's like, I'm getting all the equipment I need to be completely self-sufficient. He bought his own plate making machine. He bought his own way of casting tight. It's just like, all I need to do is get the metal, and I can keep this going. Because he thought letterpress was going to be gone. 10 years later, it started reviving. So it was interesting to see.
But looking at the past, it makes sense that he would prepare for it
Yeah,
going extinct. There's VHS, beta, et cetera, color copiers.
yeah,
It's weird, but some of these things don't. Some of these things still live side by side, and yet,
yeah. And some don't. And I mean, it's interesting for like, for instance, some of the design aspects that I used on the early album jackets in the '80s came from taking a black and white photograph and photocopying it and then sending it off for a photo engraved magnesium printing plate with no halftone on it. And there was just this, by going through this process, you get some really interesting um, aesthetics that you can't get anywhere else. I mean, it's like on the computer, you can go into Photoshop and you've got a simulation of photocopy, but it's not the same.
Mm.
If you cannot duplicate with digital what the toners in an old fashioned copy machine.
It's like adding cracks and pops into your
Yeah.
like a musical recording or something, it sounds like.
So anyway, but yeah, I mean, I can't do that because I don't have that technology isn't.
There's oh, go ahead.
It would take a great effort and a lot of money to keep that technology available. So,
Or like what, market
why?
demand, like enough of a demand from scrappy zinesters and larger graphic
I guess,
designers.
yeah. I mean, well, I mean, it's like if I wanted to try to go out and find one of those Minolta copiers again and could learn how to keep it going, then yeah, maybe I could. But
You could be the repair person. You could be the global repair person for that.
isn't that what I would want to do with my life?
Did you ever see that documentary about the typewriter repair, the like last remaining typewriter repair company in San Francisco?
No.
I wonder what you would think of that. But I watched it and just thought about some of the things you're describing, and I don't know if I'd want to be that person either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a person who buys all forms of music, I found it really neat to. I mean, it sounds corny and cliche, but it's just true. When I opened it up inside that store to figure out, get some clues about what the hell this record was, first thing I did was pull it out of the sleeve, open it up. I pulled these things out and was like, wow, that's really cool. And it just felt so, I'm a book person. So it felt that great sort of satisfying tactile experience of holding and unfolding it and the way it slid into the tab. I mean, it's just all true. All the things that marketing people say is totally true. It just felt great. So,
good.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just said good.
Yeah.
That you got that experience.
Yeah, it's just neat. And I've been teaching my daughter, about you slide these things out. This is how you put them on the record player, and then you also push play on Mama's phone when you're inside the Subaru, to play Moana or whatever. But like, it seems that for you, maybe I should just ask you instead. Like, how do you think about designing something like this? With the way music plays into the packaging, are you trying to evoke or match the sounds of the record? You got this, like you said, the sepia tones.
Yeah. I mean, like for instance, Kelso Run, I titled that because I mean, there's the train tracks that go right by there. And so it just felt like, okay, that song is about the Kelso Depot and the trains and all of that. The other songs, the Down Black Canyon Road, I think that the sheet that's there is a photo taken from Black Canyon Road of the Advance of the Desert.
There it is.
Yep.
That one?
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to find images that evoked what the piece of music is about.
And it looked like a later Scenic album had a very different packaging and very different aesthetic.
Yeah. Well, I do try to have try not to repeat myself too much. Keep moving on, keep trying new things.
Okay. So rather than have like a distinctive.
Yes. Well, there was an interesting aspect also is that in the 80s, when I was first doing this letterpress in LA, it was like I was pretty much the only one doing letterpress on chipboard. But by the end of the 80s and the early 90s, I started seeing other people being inspired by what I was doing. And I remember the first time I walked into a record store, I was visiting a friend in New York City, and I saw the first Tortoise album on the racks there, letterpress on chipboard. And my first thought was, uh-oh, I'm not unique anymore. So, it's fine. I mean, there's some people doing some amazing work with that. I had one experience though where somebody copied what I was doing. Well, there was a pretty well-known band that got signed to a major label. And somebody at the major label had seen one of my 7-inch, maybe it was the Sage single by Scenic, which has a different type of die cut package to it. And somebody at the label contacted me and said, "Oh, we'd really love for you to do this single sleeve for this band we're doing. We need 25,000. Great, this will be a great job to do, you know, be fun." Sent them all these samples and worked up pricing for them and never heard anything back.
Oh no.
Like 2 years later, I was in a record store down in Phoenix, going through the bins, and I see this letterpress on chipboard 7-inch from that band. So I open it up. They had completely copied my die cut design. They letterpress printed it with no credit as to who did the letterpress printing. It was printed really badly. And that was, I just thought, okay, that was the closest I ever came to like wanting to hire a lawyer. And like,
Oh yeah.
you guys just, not only did you rip me off, but you made it look like I did it and I did a bad job.
Insult to injury.
Ultimately, I just was like, you know, it's a story I can tell now and I get that out of it. But
yeah, but it's also it's good to remember that something that seems like a good opportunity sometimes can slimy, just dirtballs looking to rip off working artists, I guess.
yeah.
Then yeah, it's like there's a lot of writers who always worry about, you know, pitching story ideas to magazines and then somebody in-house stealing the idea and writing it themselves. And something like that happened to me at a marketing firm one time. These people disappeared, and then I checked in. Do you still want to do this thing? And they had hired somebody else and basically took my text that I'd sent them and written them as a mock-up, and it's up on the website. And I was like, "Fuck you!" And didn't realize, you know what? Who cares? Who cares? So what? Get away from the slime balls.
Well, it's interesting because it was a similar experience that caused me when I first was at UCLA. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to major in, and I got into the design major. I didn't take any graphic design courses. I was doing other types of preliminary design. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was one course where we did get into some graphic stuff, and we were supposed to come up. Everybody was going to come up with ideas for a logo for the student art show. And so everybody came in and brought 20 or 30 different sketches. And one sketches that I came up with, the teacher thought was the best. So he felt really good about that. Says, okay, now everybody take Bruce's idea and go home and let's make it better. And of course, everybody went home and worked on it. And I started feeling, man, I don't know if I like the direction this is going, but I worked on it some more and brought it back. Well, the instructor decided that these other two girls that had worked together did the best version of it. So they got to do all of the work to prepare it for the art show and make the posters. And it was kind of like, well, that was my idea. And they just actually made it less interesting and got to do the fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
it was that point where I thought, I'm not doing this anymore. And I switched my major to fine art and I had a blast.
Interesting. So you switched from graphic design for that?
Well, it was a design. I mean, they had all sorts of different designs. I mean, there was some preliminary, sketching classes and industrial design, and they did have graphic design, but anyway.
It's a weird, I don't know. It's a weird lesson too for other young artists who are learning the basics of how to work with other people and maybe what to expect professionally after college. Like somebody provides you ideas, you take it and get credit. I mean, there's just so many wrong ideas.
I realized at that point that if I continued with the design thing, I would be being creative for other people, and I wanted to be creative for myself. So.
And that seems to have informed your work when you had disagreement.
It has informed my life.
Wow. Yeah. And then also the formation of Scenic was you wanting to have a project that looked like you'd initially envisioned it, right? At the end of the process,
Yeah.
you experience the opposite in certain points in Savage Republic.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's something that comes up a lot for a working artist.
Yes.
But
Because you can't,
diplomatically,
well, I won't say you can't do it all yourself, because there are certain things you can do all yourself, like the Exploratorium release that I did. That was just, that's all me. And I don't know if you've heard any of that
I did. I
material,
listened to him.
but
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yep.
but there are things that other people can contribute, and it's appropriate to work with other people on things at times.
Yeah, it seems like definitely not a situation where it's one or the other. Because I mean, as a writer, I have to work with magazine editors, and sometimes they absolutely try to ruin it, try to make it their own, change my voice, try
Right.
you know, make it about a sappy love story instead of something more cerebral. And other times, it's the collaborative process of working with the editor can make whatever I made better than I could have done it myself. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting as a theme, to
Yeah.
think about. When do you relinquish control? How much do you open yourself to outside ideas? When is it appropriate to resist them?
Yeah.
You know,
All that.
all those things. Yeah.
Life as a human on the planet.
Yeah. It'd be interesting. Have you ever thought about, like, I don't know, writing about, not, rules to live by as a working artist, but like your own experiences and talking directly to young visual artists or other musicians and stuff about how
Um,
to, not a how
yeah,
to.
not so much, but I mean, well, it's interesting. I don't know if you've seen, about 4 years ago, there was a book published of my art called Savage Impressions.
I want to get a copy of that, but I tried to get it on the website. It's sold out, I think.
Okay, yeah,
That's a
well,
that's a side discussion.
we
Sorry.
do have copies of it, but I mean, I did get a chance to talk about my process quite a bit in that book. I mean, I didn't want it just to be a coffee table picture book. I wanted it to be informational and a documentation of what I did and how I did it. So there's a lot of information in there that you would find interesting, I think.
No, that's because that stuff is very interesting to people who make things.
Yeah.
Just how did you get where you are, but also what's your thinking? How did your experience inform your process? So,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of that in there.
Yeah.
In talking about um, collaborating and stuff makes me think about a question I had about, influences. I know you listen to soundtracks. A lot of the folks in Savage Republic were inspired by soundtracks. You covered that Greek song early on too. That
Yeah.
was, I think it was Z. But like,
Yeah.
was there music that inspired or informed the first Scenic album when you were making that? Did anything help color your songwriting or thinking?
Well, I was definitely listening to a lot of like Ennio Morricone at the time. Um, there was also another Greek album that a very obscure. So when we Savage Republic covered that Greek song, we ended up getting a big following in Greece because one of our distributors at the time was Greek, and his brother had a record shop in Athens. And it was funny because I had just started working with this distributor. He was in Chicago. He really liked the Savage Republic album, and we just released the film noir singles, would have been early '83. So I sent him a copy. I said, yeah, let me know if you want to get some. He called me up. He said, Bruce, you didn't tell me you did a Greek song. My brother has record shop in Athens. Send me 100 copies. And he starts shipping hundreds of our records over to his brother's record shop, and Savage Republic became big in Greece. So that when we finally got over there in '87 to play our first shows, we were like interviewed on Greek national radio, and we sold out 2 nights at the main rock club in Athens. It was just, yeah, it was amazing.
Wow.
And I gained an appreciation for Greek salads and feta cheese, and still with me. So. But anyway, yeah. So it was interesting because then this guy started having his brother send over a bunch of Greek, like other Theodorakis records and other Greek music. It's like, you'll like this. And it was there's a guy named Giannis Zouganellis, I think, recorded this album. called Wherever I Wander, I Long for Greece, or something like that. There's a really great. Let me see if I can. I'm just going to look and
pull it up.
Find it on Discogs. And it's such a beautiful album, and there were certain sounds that oh yeah. Oh, it was Gregoris. That's right. Zuganellis, I think, was the
Zucchini.
Okay, Gregoris is the bouzouki player on it. But I think the music is by Yanis Zuganellis, and so the original Greek album that he sent me, the English title is translated as "Wherever I Travel, Greece Wounds Me." And then I saw another release of it later where it says, "Wherever I wander, I dream of Greece," or something like that. So, but no, it's really kind of inspirational music. It's instrumental, but it has some like choral voices doing things. And there's a couple of tracks on there where there's this metallic clanging sound. And I really wanted to bring that into to a couple of the pieces on Incident at SEMA, and I was able to replicate something similar. I can't remember which songs they're on, but I had this metal piece that was like from a railroad track. You have the rail, and then this is what you hammer the nails through to hold the rail to the ground. So it was this square piece of metal that's kind of rusted. And we just hung that from a microphone stand, and I hit it with a piece of great sound. And we put it on. James had some reverb effect that was called Canyon or something like that. So we used a lot of Canyon reverb effect on Incident at SEMA because I just love it. I don't know. I just love big reverb.
It worked on guitar and it worked on the banging of metal too.
Yeah,
both. And Canyon
so yeah,
desert themed.
So there was definitely some influence there. And I think also at the time I had been listening to a lot of like the shoegaze music that was coming out of England at the time, and like Slow Dive and Lush and Ride, and even though there's not a lot of that influence in there, it definitely, I think it was, and I had an Ebo that I was playing with too on a few tracks. But I remember the little effects box that somebody brought in to loan to me, and it had this effect on it called Soft Focus, and I love that. And that's now incorporated into what I play in later Scenic and in SR2. But I was told that was the original sound that Slow Dive used, the same effect at the beginning. I think they've gone on to other things.
What was it called?
It's Soft Focus. It's on and there's an effects box by Yamaha called an FX 500, and it's one of there's like 40 different pre-programmed sounds in there, and that's one. But that's my main effects box that I use. I still use that. I've got a couple of backups because sometimes
but it just clicks for you. You just like the sound.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other pre-programmed sounds in there that I use as well. And then you can also kind of adjust them. So I've played around.
It's funny because Ennio Morricone, his name always gets evoked in anything deserty, soundtracky. But I gotta say, I've heard very few traces of Ennio overtly on SEMA. I don't know.
It's subtle. It's subtle. I think a lot of it has to do with, like, for instance, it's soundtrack for Once Upon a Time in the West. It's like you have repeating themes. There's a really amazing fuzz guitar on Once Upon a Time in the West, and I had this fuzz, like wah wah fuzz pedal antique thing that I had found, and so we used that on a couple of songs. Like Carrying On to Giz has the fuzz, but it's
Mhm.
kind of layered in there, so it just it's not as overt necessarily.
And the repeating theme too of the songs. At first, listening to the album, it confused me. I thought that Bandcamp had bounced me back to a song I'd already heard, you
Right.
know? And I thought, well, what's going on here? And maybe I just wasn't paying attention enough. And then I realized what you were doing. So Morricone did the same thing on that album.
Yeah, there's a lot of soundtrack composers that will have themes that get reconfigured throughout the record,
Hmm.
throughout the soundtrack.
But for you,
And
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, you have a theme that you keep bringing back the feel that you want, but changing it up. So
No, it's interesting that sort of unifying quality, calling it back to something that came before.
yeah,
Um, there was something else I wanted to ask you. Let me look at my list real quick, which I haven't been following at all because it's just kind of boring to do that. Oh yeah, there we go. I mean, what about the influence of surf music? Is there any trace of that in your work still? It seems like, you know,
yeah,
that was a big
definitely.
part of S Savage Republic for you,
Yeah,
but
and actually, I think probably the closest thing. Well, there's a couple of songs that Scenic did that are definitely kind of surf music influence. One is the song Sage, which is a non-album track that came out between Infinite and Aquatica. And I mean, that's one of my favorite Scenic songs altogether. And a lot of that has to do with, I mean, James is just playing this beautiful melodic bass line. He's almost like doing the lead line in a way, on the bass. And then there's another song that we were experimenting with called Tundra, which is on the Tape Excavation compilation.
that's the one I bought. That's the first song I listened to off that by pure chance, and I was like,
Yeah.
this is really good. It just grabbed me.
And the interesting thing about that song is where that came from is I had been listening to um, an album by the Byrds back in the 60s, and they have a song called Why. It starts, there's a couple of different versions of Why, but there's one version that starts off with this dun 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 dun, and it goes into the song. And I was like, I love that. And so I just kind of did my own version of that intro and then took it in a completely different direction.
Interesting. Wow. I would not have ever picked any Bird's influence out of that. It's so cool. Transmorph.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the Sage was really neat because when I was looking through Bandcamp after listening to SEMA, there was some description of Sage that mentioned surf music. So I immediately was like, click, because I've always loved surf music. I still love surf music. Just
Well, when I was in high school, I was a huge fan of adventures, and I still love a lot of that 60s era adventures stuff, mid 60s on. And interestingly enough, the Ventures were a direct influence to one of the early Savage Republic songs. The song, I mean, it doesn't sound at all like the Ventures, but the song Attempted Coup Madagascar off of Tragic Figures, the dun 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 dun, it's completely influenced by a Ventures song that has this dun 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 dun, and I was like, I'm going to do that, and then, but I don't know how to copy anything, so it just becomes its own thing. But it's an influence.
it's funny. Your inability to copy things is a creative asset.
It is absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember saying that recently to somebody. For that.
So like kids, don't learn what the name of your chords are. Don't learn what pentatonic scales are. Just play by ear, right?
Yeah.
Now it's interesting because I love Ivory Coast. I love that song, and that song that you just named I love it too. It's like those are two of my three favorite songs off that first Savage Republic album.
Well, we used to introduce Ivory Coast in live shows as this is our traditional West African surf tune. So.
Did you? I hope you caught some of that on tape. I love listening to the live albums.
I believe it's on that live CD that you requests.
Oh, is it cool?
Yeah,
Thank you,
no,
Ventures.
the recordings from live performance 81 to 83 has a lot of chitter chatter between songs because I just figured that you're there. I want to give people the experience of what was it like in this club.
That's cool that you recognize that because that's one of the for me the joys of growing up listening to bootleg live recordings. I always preferred listening to live recordings because it felt like what you just described.
Well, and that's what we did with the Savage Republic, the Africa Core Live at the Whiskey album that we released last year. That was a board tape that was made the one time we got to play the Whiskey a Go-Go, bottom of the bill. And we got, you basically get the entire show, everything between the tracks and people yelling, fuck you, and the Bill announcing this is our last song, and the half of the crowd going, yay, like get off the stage kind of, and other people, our friends going, fuck you, don't do that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
the experience of being there at that moment in time, right?
yeah,
Your lives, it's like a audio snapshot of your lives too.
yeah, exactly.
Super cool. And of that era, like when the whiskey was what it was in 81, 81, right?
80, yeah, 81.
What else is, let me see. I mean, we've talked about so many things. Um, just about the name Scenic, like since you're a photographer and a visual artist, obviously when you know the effect that typeset has on people. So when you were thinking of the name Scenic, were you thinking of how it would look on?
I wanted a name that didn't sound like a band name. And I mean, there were other bands before, like I think there was a punk band called the Scenics up in Canada. But I just liked it rather than the Scenic. I mean, actually in the late 90s had to like try to get a few other bands to stop using the name. Like there was a band in Australia that started using the name Scenic. And I wrote them and said, no, you guys, this name's taken. And so they ended up changing their name to the Scenic. And, I think there's been a couple of others since then, but I finally just decided it wasn't worth bothering with. Just keep making your music and, people will know who the real Scenic is.
They'll find you.
Yeah. I mean, we still have that issue sometimes. Like, for instance, we just did a reissue of the 80s San Francisco band, the Ophelias. Well, there's a current female band out of the Midwest called the Ophelias, and they just released a new album like a month before we released ours, and so there was definitely some confusion there. And now we're just about to release another project with the two brothers in the UK who record under the name Woo, and they've been very prolific for a lot of years, but now there's this Korean pop guy who goes under the name Woo. So we're having to like make sure that that Woo's recordings don't show up on Spotify for our Woo and all that sort of thing. It's kind of annoying, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's weird when you will look up a band now on like Apple Music and it mixes the albums of two bands who are completely different.
Yeah.
So it gets confusing.
Well, and also I think one of the reasons I chose Scenic is I thought, well, nobody would ever call their band Scenic. So of course how wrong I was.
A couple of decades pass.
Yes.
So what about the response from, I don't know, weird desert rats like me or other people? You mentioned that some people told you that they drive through the Mojave and they play that as their soundtrack. What else have you heard from people?
Hard to say. I mean, it's interesting because since moving to Bishop, I remember there are a few people that I met here who were curious about the music that I'd done. And I had a bunch of CDs of Aquatica. So I would say, well, this is probably your best intro into what I did as Scenic. And I would hear back from them several months later and say, I put that CD in my car and it hasn't left the CD player in like a month. Like it's the perfect driving music. So I do get that a lot. Is that Scenic music is the perfect driving.
Absolutely.
Or like, well, driving through the desert or driving anywhere really. So.
Write this down. Because that you also have, did that inspire the driving music, Owens Valley driving music? Wasn't
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that
somewhat.
idea?
Yes.
Because it's
Yeah,
really cool.
I just thought, well, Owens Valley is kind of a remote area, and you have to drive a long way between towns. And I was planning to do a whole album's worth of the Owens Valley driving music, but I didn't really get to it. Pretty much got those. I did a couple of other pieces, but I didn't think they were successful enough, so I kind of left them in the can.
Hmm. I mean, when I lived in Tucson in the late 90s, I was outside constantly. I would just ditch school, ditch college, and
Yeah.
do it on my weekends. And I would just pick a different place, like similar thing, like you did with Mecca back in the day. And then you did with Scenic. I would just
Yeah.
go, I haven't been in this mountain range. I'm going here. And so I'd go to the Pinaleños and I'd go to the Canelo Hills and I'd go to the Huachucas and
Yeah.
just disappear. And then I would change my plan if a cool opportunity or road presented itself. And I was always, music just became so much a soundtrack. And it's like, you can eventually start to choose what do you want to imprint on this period of your life by choosing the right soundtrack, right?
Right.
And um somebody once said that like walking turns your mind and it's such a creative act, but driving is not a creative act. Like you can't really be creative when you're driving. And I'm just like, that is not true. You
No,
you
it's
know,
not.
it's not true. You
Yeah.
grow up in the West, there's just vast distances you got to drive, and you're when you have the right music, the
Yeah.
right driving music, which is a phrase I really like now you said, like it can be a very inspiring thing if you're in the right place with the right tunes. Do you ever do you have ideas while you're driving? Do you like sketch
Uh,
ideas or
um, no, well, what's interesting is that I get more ideas while if I'm standing in front of the printing press printing. Because that's sort of like, okay, you have to keeping attention, but there's something about the repetitiveness of that seems to stimulate creative ideas. I don't do that much with the printing anymore. I've got people like Lorenzo and a couple of other people that do most of the printing, but I do get on the presses occasionally. I'm mostly in front of the computer and things like these things.
administrative work and stuff?
Yeah, administrative or a lot of the design work is done on the computer now. There's a few projects that we've done, like this incident at SEMA reissue, the tape excavation, and and the exploratorium, where those were mostly created with letterpress elements and putting things together. And I like working that way too, but most of the projects, even if we print them on the letterpress, seem to need to come together on the computer.
And it's just a different experience standing above it, repeatedly doing something repeatedly.
Yeah.
See how that would induce a state. What I was going to ask you about Sage because I was looking at the chronology. So Sage, that 7-inch came out after the LP because you had tracks that didn't make it on.
Yeah, or we were starting to develop new material, but we didn't have an album's worth of material at that time. So I think James had a friend who had a studio. To be honest, of all the Scenic material, I like the quality of the recording on the Sage single the best. And we just recorded those two. I think we actually recorded 3 songs. There's a third song called "When the Time Comes" that only appeared on a compilation, and I think so. I'm one of the ideas that I've had is to put together a compilation of singles and rarities for SEMA. So we're compile the Sage single and "When the Time Comes" and those demos, what we call it's called the Nimbus EP, which there's the Kapirowitz Plateau stuff. That there's 4 or 5 songs there. We have a demo of Tundra as a full band, and I really like it, but I do a major flub on guitar, and I was just like, I went for the wrong note, and it's obvious. So
you don't want to hear that.
No. And there's some timing issues that are not quite there. That was a tough one to work on, but there's some Robert Lovelace did this amazing keyboard thing on that version too. I could probably pick up an MP3 and send it to you so you.
I would love to hear that. Yeah, I would love it. So that was full band Tundra session.
Yes, from
Okay.
the same session as the Nimbus EP material.
Okay.
There were 4 songs that we put on that EP, one of which is Above the Rim, which was put on the Source compilation.
I tried to buy a 7-inch last night. It was the long.
The Long Sun.
Thank you. Yes.
It's a 10-inch record, actually.
Oh, that's why it had 4 songs on it.
Yeah. One is a long piece that's on the A side, and then there are 3 shorter pieces on the B side. Yeah, that came about because there was a label out of Indiana, I think, that wanted to do something with Scenic, and they said, yeah, we have this 10-inch series. We'd love to do a Scenic version. And then that was while I was living in Sedona, and Robert and Mark Mastropietro came out for a weekend, and we just jammed it in my house. It was recorded in our house in Sedona, and we picked out pieces from that, and that's what that is. So that doesn't have Brock or James on it. Doesn't have bass or drums. It's just guitars and keyboards.
Fascinating. Wow.
Nice. It's nice.
That's really cool. I'll track down a copy of that because I definitely want to hear that. It was intriguing. 10 inches too. Only 10 inches I have are from Blue Note Records.
Yeah.
So that's neat too. What else? What else do you want to tell me about Scenic? I'm gonna let you go, but like, are there other?
I don't know. Hard to say. Maybe if I think of anything, I'll let you know.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. I was just so curious about so many things, and I think we've definitely touched upon them, and I already know enough about, you know.
Well, I mean, if any other questions come up and you want to do another short session, we can do that.
Okay. No, that'd be great. Once I start transcribing and stuff too, things always pop up.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. So
super cool talking to you. I want to show you this real quick. I can't help myself. We went to Tucson. I brought my daughter there for the first time. And I got back. I hadn't drawn for 20 years. And I was like, just went into this crazy drawing mode.
Well, those are fun.
Yeah, and this one here, I was like, what do I do with this? With a vinegaroon? And how do I make a vinegaroon not disgusting to most people? Was my
I know. A good question.
Yeah. I don't know. It was just something about that place. It just has an effect. I've never been to Bishop though. That's one part of the state I've just never been in. I've been all over California, but
it's a beautiful, beautiful area. I mean, when people tried to figure out why we moved here, we'd tell them, well, it's like midway between Yosemite and Death Valley. So we have the mountains on one side and the deserts on the other, and it's a really neat place to be.
Yeah, you get a bit of everything, but lots of sunshine.
Yeah. Not today though. Stormy today.
Well, enjoy the reprieve from the relentless sun.
All right, thanks.
See you later. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.